Hello and most welcome to 1110. And I will start with an article by Michel Spremisch, written in 2012. And it's about ancient Greek ideas on the nature of reality and their influence on the discovery of quantum mechanics. In the abstract I read, the discovery of quantum mechanics in the 1920s would not have occurred without the influence on Greek ideas. Beginning with pre-Socratic thought and the subsequent formalization of Aristotelian logic, historians can trace the chronological chain of ideas that began with a debate on the particulate or continuous reduced nature of reality. These ideas shaped how scientists think, and the debate set the tone for how modern scientific evidence would be interpreted. A magnificent date, as a date that rings through all the world. The 27th of October 1924, physicists and mathematicians met at the 5th Solvay conference in
Belgium.
Yes, Belgium, Brussels, to discuss the significance of quantum mechanics and its transformative impact on contemporary physics. In the decades prior to the conference, mounting evidence of subatomic processes demonstrated that the physics behind the preeminent Newtonian mechanical view of the universe was no longer sufficient in its explanation of light and subatomic phenomena. Most surprisingly, the desire to fix the inadequacies within classical physics led to evidence that seemed to suggest that electrons possess qualities that were particulate and wave-like in nature. A duality which violated logic. This duality puzzled scientists who struggled to make sense of how an electron could both display the mutually exclusive qualities of a continuum and a discrete unit. The impassioned debate surrounding the significance of subatomic behavior at the Solvay conference legitimized quantum mechanics as a new field in physics, but its discovery did not occur in vacuum by a handful of modern scientists. By understanding Anaximander, Heraclitus, and Parmenides' ancient ideas regarding the reductive nature of the universe, their attempt to resolve opposites, and the subsequent emergence of Aristotle's law of non-contradiction, one can see how these ideas set the foundation for quantum scientists. Quantum mechanics should not only be credited to a few quantum pioneers in the 20s, rather viewed as the apex of the persistent and cumulative historical inquiry into the reduced nature of reality. The first ones in Greek and in Greek culture to abandon the prevalent previous idea of divine influence in explanations. For instance, thunder, earthquake, the movement of the sea, ebb and tide, weather changes. With the Milesians from Thales, that changed. Humanity went into a quite other direction, and I would say radical direction, because this only took place in one place in the world, at one place in history. It has never happened anywhere else, and it's important to understand the radical intellectual shift from a theological explanation to natural causes. I don't think that could be overemphasized. It never happened in China. Divine influence was still prevalent by the colonization of the Chinese coast in the late 19th century. And I think it is to a great extent even today. The same goes for India, Indochina, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, you name it. It's a unique thing. For instance, Anaximander continued the rational discussion and reasoned his way to conclude that the universe is reducible to a continuous primary substance. This he referred to as a peiron, or that which has no boundaries. He did not rely on sense perception, also very important, not sense perception, in order to formulate his theory. A peiron cannot be observed, nor can it be defined. A fragment of his surviving writing states, "The non-limited apeiron is the original material of existing things. Further, the source from which existing things derive their existence is also that to which they return at their destruction. According to necessity, for they give justice and make reparation to one another for their justice, according to the arrangement of time." Very aptly put as well. Few times have I seen it so condensed. And also that it's time itself that do the arrangement. You can compare time to divine intervention. Time instead of divine intervention, and the substance or the will of God is being replaced by existence, or archeia, which is also its name sometimes. This was the very first instance in which the fundamental nature of reality was thought to be reducible to a continuous form. More importantly, Anaximander began to question the fallibility of human senses. His theory held that there is an underlying nature of reality unservable to the human eye. So I need to make a correction here. It's something wrong in the text. Anaximander began to question the fallibility of the human senses. He proclaimed the fallibility of human senses, that they were not sufficient or accurate. That is very important. A printing mistake can sometimes underline, because it's a slap over the face. Otherwise I would just have read it and ignored it. His theory held that there is an underlying nature of reality unobservable to the human eye. This is very important. This is a movement that is even more radical than the first. His theory held that there is an underlying nature of reality unobservable to the human eye, and therefore only being comprehensible through the use of reason. You see here how reason, from being almost non-existent, is being elevated, reified, and in the end made the only thing that can judge anything about the world. This is the first step of abandoning the senses, and I would say abandoning the body. Also a development that never happened in India, for instance. So I think it's very extremely important at this stage to understand the uniqueness, where it's going, and that never happened anywhere else. Because we I was thinking earlier on about the Declaration of Human Rights in the United Nations. We think them to be universal, but we forget these things. Reason to be one thing only and the only thing to judge is very unique for Greek tradition. It's never happened anywhere else. And of course, this is the first seed to quantum mechanics. In contrast to other Milesian materialists who believe that the universe is reducible to primary elements, he insisted that reality is reducible to a substance that cannot be defined due to the fallibility of the senses. Anaximander's theory is relevant because his idea would be revisited by atomic theorists of the 19th century, who theorized that an unobservable microscopic substance is at the heart of all matter. In addition, apeiron is the fundamental substance that is responsible for the creation of complex macroscopic objects through the mitigation of opposites. Anaximander implies that the contradictory forces are not mutually exclusive. It's a cooperative duality that is necessary for the universe's existence. This concept would be evidenced by the electron's simultaneous particle and wave-like behavior, as discovered in the beginning of the 20th century. An electron's dual nature being an essential property of the atomic structure from which all things are created. The heart of reality depends upon a necessary dichotomy, and Heraclitus of Ionia agreed. He continued Anaximander's work by favoring a prime universal continuum, but disagreed on its core essence. He believed that all material things are reducible to fire rather than apeiron. I do not agree with the author of the article, but it doesn't matter. However, when we analyze his surviving written fragments, it seems like paradoxical nonsense. One surviving fragment states that fire rests from change. He resolves this paradox by theorizing that two polarized states, such as the state of rest and the change, are not mutually exclusive. Rather, opposites are necessary because they exist in tension. And it is that very tension that is the catalyst for change and material transformation. A second and third surviving fragment attributed to Heraclitus states, "Everything flows, pandarei." And in the same river we step and we don't step. These simple phrases further support his belief of an ever-changing universe that is in constant motion. Scientist and mathematician Werner Heisenberg further substantiate the continuously evolving universe in his uncertainty principle. A mathematical equation which proves that the position and the momentum of a subatomic particle cannot be observed simultaneously. That is, we can't both have where it is and where it's going. When an observer views an electron, they will only witness its blurred path, and like a river that is constantly in a state of motion, an electron's inherent motionless quality cannot be observed by the human senses. You can also rephrase that it's either time or space. Why? Because location is space. What is momentum? Momentum is time, because momentum means potential for movement. Both direction and force. So you have to choose. And I would say that shows the paradoxical and necessarily so paradoxical nature of reality. Because without this contradiction between time and space, I would say we can have neither time nor space, as proven also by the Wigner equation. In contrast, I would say, Parmenides of Elea addressed the opposing states as, for instance, being and not being, by reasoning that states of mutual exclusivity cannot logically exist within a universe that is an indivisible unit. You could call this the unit theory. And I would argue that this is the theory that still lingers on. We see the universe as one unit, not being able to support contradictory forces of one kind only, either wave or particle, or saying that wave and particle together makes up the universe, which is so absolutely wrong. His idea that the universe exists as a single unit suggests that although reality is not reducible to a single essence from the human perspective, the whole universe is reducible to a particle due to the universe's already reduced state. Furthermore, the idea of mutually exclusive concepts cannot exist in an undivided unit due to its unified state, despite human sense perception suggesting otherwise. Much of Parmenides' theories were proven incorrect by future science. However, it is important to note that certain critical aspects of his ideas still are relevant to modern science. For example, his assertion that the universe is one universal particle is not far off base. Erwin Schrödinger's work on wave function mechanics relies on a mathematical equation that only works in a universal closed system, which suggests that the universe is one single unit, despite perceptive changes. I would say that there are some complications to that conclusion of Michel Spremisch. I would say that the perceptive change and the perceptive changelessness both are derived from the same contradictory dual system of wave and particle. Because particle is no change, whereas wave is change. Anaximander, Heraclitus and Parmenides' works were significant because they utilized reason. Do not forget, reason is a unique Western, especially reason as cut off from the body. Why do I say that? Well, from that point onward, at least from the start of Anaximander, we are no longer taking perception or experience into consideration. We have reached already some sort of pure rationality. And we must remember, this is almost to the spot, that point in development in Greek tradition that coincide what Richard E. Lynn called the development of the reflective consciousness. This giving up the thymus, the body, going up somewhere, usually referred to as the head, but it's not of the body, which is very important. In his famous work, Physics by Aristotle, he offers the balanced approach by concluding that the senses can be trusted to a certain degree, but one should use caution, because observation or reason alone can lead to the individual astray in the quest for the absolute truth. One must supplement observation with logical analysis. However, it is necessary to begin the process of deduction with a universally agreed upon fact. In the opening lines of physics, he states, the natural way to go about this is to start with what is more intelligible and clear to us, and move from there to what is clearer and more intelligible in itself. I'm going to stop there and put in a parenthesis. No, stop here in my reading of the article. And that is that this is a very good explanation by Aristotle, although he was not a Milesian, he's way past the Milesians. But you see the possible danger here, and is that we have only rationality. And that started with the Ionian material philosophy. We disregard the senses. That could go well, could go bad, but we lose the compass that the senses can provide. So from that starting point in the process of involvement with thinking processes, things could go really well and really bad, whereas before we were stuck with the senses. That meant that we didn't go too far away from reality, but we didn't develop either. And what the Milesians provided was a further development, much elevated in the sense, in the literal sense, up here. But we lost that, what can you say, farmish stuckness to the earth. We could go further and we can really end up here, bad, like Plato, I would say here. That's only possible after the fact that we give up the senses. It's a necessary thing for Descartes to say cogito ergo sum, because he disregards the senses. Otherwise, you don't have to rationally think if you really exist. You sense. So this, even though Aristotle is later than the Milesian philosophers of nature, it's a very good summary up what happened. Furthermore, he dismissed the belief of a particular reality because it is logically inconsistent due to the observed perpetual fluidity of change and mutual influence between material objects. Dr. John Bell of Stanford writes, Aristotle defines continuity as a relation between entities rather than attribute pertaining to a single entity. That is to say that he does not provide an explicit definition of the concept of continuum. He observes that a single continuous whole can be brought into existence by gluing together two things which have been brought into contact, which suggests that the continuity of a whole should derive from the way its parts join up. This is extremely important, and it's pertinent for what I've been written here. And it's about, we are abandoning inherent properties here. We always see things as, in Aristotle thinking, as relational. We lose identity, because the only identity we have in the Aristotelian way of seeing things, it's an identity that is relational, in contrast to something that has another identity. Sort of, this Pepsi Max bottle or can is only Pepsi Max bottle or can in relation to this mug. and all other things. It doesn't have a true nature of its own. And this is, I would say, a further abandoning of the senses. Why is that? Well, if something has an inherent quality of being something, that can be observed, sensed, felt, perceived. But the relation we cannot perceive. So it's in the direction of transcendentalism. It is still very helpful because that's necessary for the Newtonian development. You need to sort of free the thinking from the stuckedness of direct perception. But it's also a danger there, that you lose all of your perception, all of your direct access to reality. We used to have, before the Milesians, and this is also something that Heraclitus tries to show us, an identity in a true, non-excluding way, not by comparison, not looking at its contradictory fact, like between the Coca-Cola can and the mug. And God in himself, true existence. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm actually pointing to Xenophanes here. He's also influenced by this. Xenophanes' God is a God based on exclusion, the principle of exclusion. He cannot have a personality. Why is that? Well, when you compare personalities, you see they are different. They are relational. And therefore concludes Xenophanes, they are not permanent, they are impermanent, they are due to change. Therefore we must abandon them. You see, his way of reasoning is influenced by the Milesian, or similar thinking as Milesians. But he goes in the wrong way, so to speak. I shouldn't call it the wrong way. But you can see in which way he goes. And once that path is began, it's no turning back. Because in the end, you will have to use reason to defend the senses, which doesn't really make sense from the perspective of reason itself. And therefore, it is not, I wouldn't say it's too exaggerated that only one thing can stop this turn, and that was quantum mechanics, because it is the ground that the Milesians are standing, the arche itself, that raises up and gives us a slap over the face and say, even the arche is telling you, you are the starter of this. You need to take the perception into consideration. And what is quantum mechanics? It is allowing for perception in physics. Yes, in a very limited way, but it's still perception. It's the observer state. It's the modus. Something that we try to kick out in classical physics. Should be no observer. He's an obstacle. He or she or it is an obstacle. And I would say, and I think most philosophers felt that, Plato definitely felt that existence through relation is weak and dependent. And he felt that dependence, he felt that weakness, and therefore he needed to reify, and in the end, he made reality inaccessible for us. We cannot even reach into reality. That was the only politics he could manage to preserve an independent, real reality at a very huge cost. Incredibly huge cost. Because now it's no turning back. And the more you go into the cave, the further you go from reality. Who would have thought that reason and perception go hand in hand? Who would have thought that particle and wave go hand in hand? No one. That lesson can only come from reality, the arche itself. It can only come from the one we trust the most. The one the Milesians were pointing to, the outmost reality. That was the only teacher we were trusting. We had at that stage abandoned all other teaching. We trusted only that one. And therefore, quantum mechanics is so incredibly important. Because here we have the start of everything that is giving us a very valuable lesson, and it doesn't cover only physics. It doesn't cover only nature. It covers everything. How we think, how we act, how we philosophize. Everything. How we live a good life. How we can be morally good. How we can even move. Because if you go too far in Parmenides, there is no movement at all. And I would say we went into Parmenides. For us, movement is a problem. I would say in our bodies as well. That we don't move explosively and we don't have stillness. I would say action and stillness are complementary. And something that I vaguely realized when I studied Heraclitus in the eyes of Charles H. Kahn. But now I really realize that more. And action can be seen as the wave function, and stillness, of course, what is it? The particle, of course. Particle is still because it's localized. The wave cannot be said to be still. And I would say this also parallels, let the voice speak for itself. Don't tell the voice what it is, let it speak. Let the voice be heard. Don't tell preemptively what it is, thereby you will strangle it. Thereby you will take the Parmenidean path into complete stillness. And you will not even have stillness, because it comes from a relation, and a relation that is a contradiction, not as in the so well explained by Aristotle, not a relation by still things. This is different, and I think this will further our bodily structure and our lives, because we strive these days for stillness and relaxation in the TV sofa, but we don't realize being swift in action during the day is the complementary force for you to be able to relax. The more tensed or at least stable parts in the body, the ventral surfaces, are important for the stillness of the dorsal. In their working together, you can have both stillness and action. You can have swiftness and slowness. And I would say that goes for the thinking as well. Thinking can be slow, but it can also be rapid. This is sort of an antidote to the Parmenidean preemptive, too aggressive, too crude thinking. That sort of strangles reality before it has any chance to speak or to become. Because becoming itself is a process in quantum mechanics. And becoming in classical physics, I would say I can't even understand what it means. It doesn't mean anything there. It just doesn't make any sense. That was a pleasure having this lecture. I say thank you very much. And have a very nice afternoon. Bye bye.
Thank you.